Deputy Speaker, there are two articles I would refer to in my debate. So I want all to know that I would adopt such articles and I would sign at the end. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the bill before us, the Climate Change and Carbon Market Initiatives Bill 2022, is important legislation in our national response to the global climate emergency. This is an area in which the government and opposition can agree. This is a new type of legislation for our country. Continued increases in temperatures and the melting of polar glaciers may lead to sea level rises that could wipe out much of the land mass of countries such as ours. We all must take the threat seriously and do our part to limit the warming of our planet due to human activity. The recent onslaught of hurricanes, including Hurricane Dorian, traumatized for Bahamians the severe and devastating effects of a warming planet. This includes more powerful storms and weather events, including deadly floods, fires, and droughts around the world. And such major destructive storms, a rising sea level, coastal erosions, the dying of coral reefs, and other examples demonstrate the particular threat to small island nations and archipelagos of climate change. Mr. Deputy, before I speak to the objectives of this bill, I wish to offer some context about the effects of climate change on countries like the Bahamas. After visiting the Bahamas following Hurricane Dorian, Alexander Agosti served as the principal author of a World Bank blog dated October 17, 2019, in which he described what he saw in the aftermath of Hurricane Dorian. He quote, "I have never seen this level of destruction. I was deployed to Haiti after 2010 earthquake, New York after Superstorm Sandy, Northeast Nigeria after the worst of the Boko Haram insurgency, and to Somalia and Malawi after devastating droughts and floods delivered destruction on the tragic level." He went on to say, "But mere walking through the worst areas of Abaco in northern Bahamas in the wake of Hurricane Dorian provided a glimpse of what total devastation really looks like." He further went on to say, "Informal settlements like Pigeon Peas and the mud in downtown Marsh Harbor on the Abaco Islands are now completely flattened, littered with the remnants of daily life such as appliances, clothing, and construction debris. Cars and shipping containers lay everywhere, tossed around as children's toys. Close to the waterfront, where colorful restaurants, marinas, and inns once stood, only the battered remnants of buildings remained." He further said, "And in the worst hit areas, as my colleague Paloma Zapata stated, the stench is gut-wrenching. This is surely the smell of death." And the World Bank blog continued, "Clearly, it will take a massive, years-long effort to recover, but the Bahamas has the benefit of starting out with some of the fundamental ingredients necessary for recovery. That is, a government that understands the threat of climate change and the importance of building back better. International partners who are committed to supporting and investing in recovery efforts, a private sector that is rolling up its sleeves, and importantly, communities that are determined to bounce back from the fury of Hurricane Dorian. Mr. Deputy, on September 27, 2019, weeks after Hurricane Dorian, I addressed the UN General Assembly, and I wish to reiterate some of what I said at that time to the Bahamian people and to the international community, which remains just as urgent today. I quote, "The Bahamas inhabits approximately 180,000 square miles of ocean, with 17 principal islands, with cities, towns, and settlements, with names like Marsh Harbor, Hope Town, 8 Mile Rock, West End, and Sweetings Key, reflecting the rich and diverse heritage of our country." Canadian astronaut Chris Hadfield once noted, quote, "From space, the Bahamas is the most beautiful place on earth." He went on to say, "The Bahamas are gorgeous. The deep trench in the ocean floor, called the tongue of the ocean, which comes between the islands, is the most beautiful deep indigo color. With great pride, we delight in sharing our archipelago, our vibrant culture, and our wonderful wonders, our natural wonders, with millions of visitors from around the world. We are stewards of this natural treasury for ourselves and for humanity. But this surpassing beauty and our very existence of a country of many low-lying islands and over 2,400 keys are under grave threat. It is a threat, Mr. Speaker, which we did not cause. It is a threat which we cannot survive on our own. And while many countries have coastal cities or zones, the entire Bahamas is a coastal zone of many keys and islands in an extensive archipelago. Over the last 3 decades, hurricanes have grown increasingly lethal throughout our region. The small island countries in the Caribbean, in the Atlantic, in the Pacific, and in the Indian Ocean and around the world are on the front lines of being swallowed into an abyss created initially by human activity and increasingly by inaction. Our vulnerabilities as states on the front line are profound. Coral and mangrove degradation, land erosion, increased tidal movements, and the myriad other consequences of global warming increase our vulnerability and handicap our ability to develop and to establish effective resilience measures. I further stated we cannot make meaningful progress toward or achieve sustainable development goals if, as forecasters are predicting, that recent cyclonic and other extreme climate events are poised to become the new normal and may worsen. And when one storm can obliterate an island state or a number of states in one hurricane season, how will we survive? How can we develop? How will we continue to exist? I further said, so I add my urgent plea to the cries and voices of many other leaders and citizens of the global commons, urging the nations of the world here assembled at this General Assembly to treat the global climate emergency as the greatest challenge facing humanity. It is a challenge that, if not treated with greatest urgency, will continue to ravage small island states such as the Bahamas, and will also have a devastating impact on more developed states. The Bahamas fully supports the Secretary General's comprehensive strategy to address a global emergency which will eventually devastate the entire planet. And this includes his plea to international financial institutions to provide concessionary financing to countries severely impacted by the external shocks occasioned by climate change. The Bahamas, especially with many islands and keys requiring basic infrastructure, has major vulnerabilities and resilience deficiencies. And we must urgently address these vulnerabilities in order to secure our citizens and to protect vital public and private infrastructure. For many years, the Bahamas and countries with similar characteristics have urged an alternative to per capita gross national income as the sole indicator of a country's level of development and eligibility for concessionary financing. When we call for consideration of a country's unique local circumstances, when determining financial worthiness, this is also a condition and requirement for our resilience. I further said the Bahamas is a testament to the ability of small island developing states to manage debt despite such external shocks, end quote. Mr. Deputy Speaker, while we may have our policy and political disagreements, we share common purpose and common cause as political parties to protect and to preserve our Commonwealth. And this bill seeks to give effect to the Paris Agreement to aid in the global response to the threat of climate change and to create and implement initiatives to offset carbon emissions. The bill before us has as its objectives to enable the government to create incentives and implement initiatives to support the overall global target of greenhouse gas emission reduction, consistent with its nationally determined contributions. To ensure compliance by the Bahamas of its obligations under the Paris Agreement, taking into consideration the common but differentiated responsibilities, respective capabilities, and flexibility provisions acknowledged under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change for small island developing states to address climate change and to enable the establishment of a market in the Bahamas to trade in carbon credits. These are good and necessary objectives. As with all legislation, the implementation is key in terms of how the government apparatus will work or not work. According to the bill, the administration of this new legislation will include the shared ministerial responsibility of the Prime Minister, the Minister of Finance, and the Minister responsible for Environment and National Resources. The appointment of a management company, the functions of which will be those functions specified in Clause 7, and the appointment and functions of an advisory council, which will have responsibility for serving as a technical advisory body to a management company. Who and which parts of the Office of the Prime Minister, the Ministry of Finance, the Ministry of Environment, will specifically be responsible for the implementation and oversight of this legislation. There are many laws in our books, Mr. Deputy, but the so-called devils and angels are in the details. This legislation should not just be window dressing. What role might the delivery unit in OPM play in the oversight of this legislation? Clause 30 of the bill provides for the extensive regulation making power of the Prime Minister. What experts and who will be utilized to create and to oversee various regulations? What is the timetable for the creation of the various regulations? Will they be designed and implemented with transparency and accountability? When will the advisory council be appointed? Will the government publicly announce the members of this council? The bill states, for the purpose of this act, the Minister of Finance may enter into a management contract with a reputable company to perform any of the functions specified in Section 7. A management company shall have expertise and be qualified in the environmental field and financial markets. The Minister of Finance may, in writing, modify the terms and conditions of a management contract and may be necessary and agreed, as may be necessary and agreed to by the parties. Nothing in subsection 1 shall prohibit the minister from entering into more than one management contract, provided that no more than one management contract shall be appointed to manage or sell the same class or type of carbon credits. Mr. Deputy, like any market, the carbon credit market has good actors and companies, as well as those who engage in such markets with corrupt practices and funny business in mind. We must ensure that the good name of the Bahamas is not corrupted by domestic or international individuals and companies who will use our country for corrupt or other purposes. What other measures is the government going to use, including our range of regulatory agencies, to oversee the carbon market in our Bahamas? I note, Mr. Deputy, that the legislation does speak appropriately and directly to the issue of double counting. The international emissions trading and carbon market are worth many billions of dollars. Again, the Bahamas must ensure that this market is not sullied or taken advantage of those who are not serious or those who seek to engage in corrupt practices or activities. Mr. Deputy, again, while I support this bill, I raise several advisory points for the governing side. In the Bahamas, we are good at passing legislation. We often fall short in the afterwork, which is critical to making the legislation meaningful. If the government is serious about this legislation, it should commit to bringing it into force soon after its passage in both houses of Parliament. It is not good enough to have plenty talk in Parliament, pass the law, and then leave it lingering for months or years without enactment. If the government does that, it would mean all of this here today was for nothing. Additionally, many rules and organizations needed to be created, organized, and funded for this legislation to work. A management company or management companies have to be selected to lead this carbon trading scheme by the government. An advisory council has to be appointed to serve as a technical advisory body to a management company and to provide advice to the Prime Minister. A national admissions registry has to be created along with the appointment of a registrar. A lot of work and a lot of money and many people will be needed to make this work. Is the government serious about doing the hard work to make this legislation successful? What we know of this government is it likes to appoint its supporters to plush jobs. With the New Day government, will the New Day government just use this legislation to allow its supporters, whom it appoints, to travel all over the world to climate change conferences or at taxpayers' expenses? Bahamians support measures to combat climate change. I repeat, Bahamians support measures to combat climate change. However, Bahamians would view this very seriously. When it is time to select a management company or companies as set out in the bill, will only PLP firms be considered? For success, we need the best people appointed to the roles set out in this proposed law. For success, we need the best companies selected to manage what the legislation set out. And if the New Day administration fills these roles with PLPs only, who are just in it for the money, this legislation will fail. Always remember, PLPs do not have monopolies on knowledge, nor does F&M. But Bahamians working together, we can succeed. Mr. Deputy, in our 2021 election manifesto, in the section entitled The Environment and Renewable Energy, the Free National Movement pledged the following, which I offer to the government by way of recommendations. To do our part in the fight against climate change and to transition our economy more toward renewable energy in the next term, we intend to, 1, set an effective minimum SARE rating for importation of air conditioning systems to ensure only energy-efficient air conditioners are used in the Bahamas. 2, lower duty on all home appliances that meet a defined energy efficiency standard. 3, pass and enact a Renewable Energy Encouragement Act to facilitate activity in a robust Bahamian-led sector. 4, through various incentives, allow independent power producers to start building a selection of renewable energy plants. 5, installation of solar PV systems on government buildings. Lower duty on all fully electrical vehicles. Make renewable energy 30% of electricity needs by 2030. Build solar plants for family islands. Expand solar street lightings to more communities across our country. Increase penalties for illegal dumping. Ensure there are proper waste management sites across the family islands. You would remember that we had chronic problems with our dump site on Howell Road, and that has now been corrected. Establish an organized national campaign to address the rodent problem. Mr. Deputy, while I'm on my feet, I only want to point out so that all can hear that I live in the tropical garden area next to Gambia, and within the tropical garden area, an application came forth, and our government for what we thought was repair of cars and sale or rental of SD cars. It was denied because it's a residential area. And immediately after election, on October 10th, it was subsequently passed. We in the tropical garden area are trying our best to stop this from proceeding. It's a residential area, and we do not feel that cars should be repaired, nor rented or sold from within the areas of individuals' beautiful homes, which can subsequently cause deterioration and devaluation of their homes and possibly the introduction of rodents. I hope all within the Ministry of Works and Town Planning hear my voice as I speak for my constituency and my neighborhood and cease the progression of such development. Develop and enact land use management plans on all major islands to create a structure as to how land is developed. Rigorous enforce environmental laws and rules. Invest in further protection of and upgrade to our national parks and create robust waste-to-energy programs around the country to partnership with the private sector in order to provide electricity to landfill sites and surrounding areas. Mr. Deputy, major countries and international bodies are good at making pledges to help small island states to build resilience and to combat climate change. But they largely and continually fail to deliver on these big promises. May I appeal to the Prime Minister and the Minister of Environmental Affairs by way of encouragement to continue to work with CARICOM and other partners to press the international community for specific funds and assistance in the areas of renewable energy and climate adaptation, mitigation, and resilience. May I also recommend that the work on solarization at the Office of the Prime Minister be completed as a good example of the country. We had commenced a program to completely solarize the Office of the Prime Minister and introduce within the parking lot of the Prime Minister's office solar facilities for all vehicles coming into the OPM as solarized vehicles or electrical vehicle. I wish to address one other area related to environmental protection. During our last administration, a ban on single-use plastics was brought into effect, bringing the Bahamas in line with global environmental practices. But there's more work to be done on plastic pollution here at home and around the world. I note that a few weeks ago, that the most recent Our Ocean Conference was held in one of Pacific nations under the theme, Our Ocean, Our People, Our Prosperity. The President of the UN General Assembly, Abdullah Shahid, who is from Maldives, which is on the front line of addressing the climate change crisis, further urged the international community to address plastic pollution, among other areas of environmental concern. A report on the conference on the United Nations website noted, and I quote, "Just last week, researchers found, and it's important to listen, researchers found for the first time microplastics in lungs of humans, highlighting the scale of severity of the problem." Further went on, given that plastic takes hundreds of years to degrade, it is estimated that only about 20% of the plastics created since 1950s has been incinerated or successfully recycled, highlighting the importance of amplifying synergies between our ocean action and other sustainable development goals, such as poverty reduction and sustainable consumption and production. Mr. Shahid reiterated the importance of a complete ban on plastic pollution in our ocean. Mr. Deputy, for this legislation to work, we must also educate our people on what this all means. Many do not understand fancy talk about carbon credits and trading. The government needs to find a way to communicate these proposed developments in a way in which the common person may understand. Otherwise, the people will think that the government may be mixed up in funny businesses and trying to take advantage of a lack of understanding of the new global regime. There's already a lot of misunderstanding as to how our natural resources industries work. From that misunderstanding has come much resentment that some are doing well of the commonwealth of our land and waters, while the common man and woman get nothing. Mr. Deputy, I thank you very much, and I hope the Ministry of Works and Town Planning would have heard my call as I speak as the member of Kalani and a member of the Tropical Garden Association who was plagued with such a problem that came about on October 10th of this year that we would like to be resolved. Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy.